Good evening, lovers of history and the world's strange turning points. Tonight we step into a Roman marching camp at dusk, smoke from cook fires drifting low, iron tools clinking, men shouting measurements over the scrape of spades. You smell fresh-cut pine and wet earth. A ditch is already opening around the camp like a scar, and the gate posts are going up before the last cohort has even stacked its packs. This is the hook. The Roman army didn't arrive somewhere and then decide what to do. It arrived with a system already running. The legion was built to repeat: march, build, drill, feed, guard, move, again and again, until it felt less like an army and more like a factory that could walk. The layout is standardized. Streets appear in straight lines, tents snap into assigned blocks, and the headquarters zone forms at the center like the heart of a machine. A centurion stalks along a row of tents, counting. He isn't admiring bravery, he's hunting disorder. Inside his head there's a tight, familiar conflict. If I let one shortcut slide, I'll pay for it in blood later. Nearby, an exhausted recruit wipes mud off his hands and thinks the opposite. If this is every night, how long before my body quits? Orders move fast because everyone already knows what the signals mean. Horn calls, flag gestures, a watchword passed down the line. Rome trained men to react before they had time to argue with themselves. Even rest is organized, sentries posted by schedule, firewood stacked, water fetched, latrines dug downwind. In the Roman mind, safety isn't luck, it's procedure. And here's the pressure. This camp isn't just protection. It's a message to the enemy beyond the dark trees. Rome can stop anywhere and instantly become fortified. It's hard to ambush a force that wakes up inside its own walls. The last hammer strike lands. The gate closes. The night watch begins. And in the black beyond the ditch, someone is listening, learning the pattern, waiting for the first weak link. At dawn the camp wakes on a schedule, not a mood. You hear the sharp bark of commands, the slap of sandals on packed dirt, the hiss of grain porridge boiling in iron pots. A line forms at the water point. Another line forms at the armorer's tent where leather straps are checked and rechecked. Nothing here is casual. The legion runs on predictable hours. First, structure. The legion is divided into cohorts into centuries. A centurion controls his century like a foreman controls a work crew. Training, punishment, and the daily standard of not sloppy. He carries a vine staff, and the men notice it the way livestock notices a fence. His private conflict is blunt and practical. If I'm too kind, they'll die. If I'm too harsh, they'll break. Behind him the Optio, his second, counts heads and quietly hates surprises. Missing one man becomes missing a shield in a crisis, he thinks. Second, routine. Every day includes drill, weapons practice, marching, and labor. Yes, labor. Romans expected soldiers to dig, build, haul, repair. That is why the legion could move through hostile territory and still keep its logistics breathing. A recruit grips a wooden practice sword heavier than the real one and feels his wrists shake. Inside, he argues with himself. I joined for pay and status, so why am I doing carpentry with a weapon? Third, signals and authority. The Roman camp is loud with controlled information. Horn calls tell units where to assemble. Flags mark positions. Orders are repeated down the chain. So a general doesn't need to shout at thousands. He needs centurions who enforce clarity. The legate, reading reports in a lamplit tent, has his own tension. If discipline slips, I lose the campaign. If discipline tightens too far, I invite mutiny. Even meals are managed. Ration issue, grain grinding, bread baking. A quartermaster watches a stack of sacks like it's a treasure vault. If the grain spoils, he thinks, the enemy won't need to fight us. By mid-morning the camp already feels temporary, because the system is designed to fold up and move. And today, the next lesson arrives with a simple order. March out, find a crossing, and build a bridge before sunset. The march begins with a sound like rain made of metal, helmets shifting, mail brushing, buckles clicking as men settle into step. The road is hard underfoot, then suddenly soft where last night's frost has melted into mud. Mules snort, and pull wagons heavy with tools. The air tastes of cold dust and sweat. Marching is training. Romans didn't just walk to war. They marched in formation with weight, pack, armor, weapons, sometimes stakes for the palisade, because a tired army panics, and a panicked army dies. A centurion watches for gaps, dragging men back into line with a curse. His inner conflict is constant. Push them hard now, or carry them later. A young soldier behind him feels humiliation burn hotter than the sun. If I fall out, I'm not just weak, I'm dangerous to the man beside me. The system includes pacing, rest stops, and discipline on the move. Scouts range ahead and to the sides. The column is organized so supplies and engineers can be accessed quickly. If the front is attacked, the rest doesn't dissolve into a mob. Units know their role. That's the machine's advantage. Parts that can react without needing a new plan each minute. By midday, they reach water. Fast, gray, and loud. A river crossing is a test of organization. Men strip and tie gear into bundles. Engineers step forward with measuring rods. Axes ring as trees fall. The smell of fresh sap opens in the cold air. A senior engineer, hands stained with resin, feels a tight fear he never admits aloud. If my bridge fails, it won't be my pride that drowns. It'll be my men. While work teams cut and lash beams, guards form a perimeter. Rome builds under protection, not after. The enemy is forced to watch a problem being solved in real time. A local villager across the water, hidden among reeds, feels dread twist in his stomach. If they can do this today, what stops them tomorrow? The bridge starts as scattered timber. Then it becomes a line. Then it becomes a path. And as the first cohort steps onto creaking planks, the river stops being a barrier and becomes an invitation to whatever waits on the far bank. By late afternoon, they halt on unfamiliar ground, and the command comes without drama: build camp. The field is empty, wind pushing dry grass flat, but within minutes it turns into a construction site. Spades bite. Baskets of soil move hand to hand. The smell is raw earth and crushed weeds. The ditch deepens, the rampart rises, and sharpened stakes appear like teeth. The marching camp is a Roman signature because it is standardized. Each unit has assigned work. One digs, one builds, one stands guard, one brings water, one prepares food. Tents are placed by template so anyone can navigate even in darkness. Streets are laid out so troops can form quickly and move without tangling. The headquarters sits at the center where orders and records live. A tribune, young, well-born, trying not to look nervous, walks the perimeter and fights his private fear. If I look incompetent, the centurions will ignore me when it matters. A veteran, shoulders aching from the shovel, thinks something quieter. I miss the farm, but a ditch like this might keep me alive. Even the cook, stirring grain in an iron pot, carries tension. If the food is thin, discipline gets brittle. Rome also places latrines carefully, downwind, away from water sources, because disease kills silently. Waste is managed. Water is controlled. Firewood is stacked. Sentries are posted with clear fields of view. The camp is protection against the enemy and against chaos inside the ranks. This is how the legion becomes hard to surprise. An ambush might hit the column, but at night, the Romans sleep behind earthworks they built themselves. To beat them, an enemy must attack faster than the camp can rise, or smarter than the template. As darkness settles, torches flicker along the rampart. The watchword passes from mouth to mouth. And beyond the ditch, somewhere in the trees, someone is mapping the camp's geometry, looking for the one moment the machine slows. In the morning, discipline becomes sound. Horn calls slice the air. Shields thump as men form up. The ground is cold and damp under sandals. Training begins before the body feels awake. Throwing practice javelins, striking posts with heavy wooden swords, drilling formation changes until legs burn and lungs rasp. Romans trained for repetition under fatigue. They didn't want courage that depends on mood. They wanted actions that happen even when fear takes the wheel. The centurion watches each man's grip, stance, timing. He has a hard, ugly conflict he never softens. If they don't learn pain here, they'll learn death out there. A recruit's mind rebels, then bargains. If I endure this, I earn pay, status, a future. Formation is the heart. Men learn spacing, alignment, how to keep a line straight even when the ground isn't. They practice rotating ranks, supporting comrades, maintaining shield coverage. It looks simple until you try it with sweat in your eyes and a pack on your back. A medic nearby checks blisters and cracked lips and thinks, infection is the enemy that doesn't carry a banner. This training is paired with inspection. Kit must be clean. Weapons must be maintained. Sandals must be repaired. Rome standardizes equipment because standardization makes supply easier and performance predictable. The armorer's tent smells of oil and hot metal as rivets are hammered into place. A quartermaster counts replacement straps and feels his private dread. If one link fails, it fails during contact, not during planning. All of this builds toward combat behavior. When the command finally comes to move against a hostile village or hold a ridge, units already know where to stand and how to respond. The Legion doesn't find itself in battle. It arrives as itself. By noon, sweat dries into salt on faces and tunics. The men think the day's hardest work is done. Then the general's order comes, quiet, decisive. They're not drilling today for practice. They're drilling today because the enemy is close enough to hear the horns. Battle begins with nerves, not swords. The air is thick with dust. Men chew the last of their bread without tasting it. You can smell sweat trapped under armor. Hear the soft rattle of pila against shields as they're shifted into throwing position. The line forms. Standards lift. The world narrows to the space between ranks. Roman tactics rely on cohesion. Cohorts advance in measured steps. The front holds shields tight. The rear supports and replaces. When the signal comes, pila arc forward. Heavy, brutal, meant to punch into shields and bend so they can't be thrown back. Then the gladius work begins at close range, where training matters more than bravado. This is not heroic single combat. It's coordinated pressure. A young officer feels his throat tighten as the enemy yells and beats weapons against wood. His conflict is pure status terror. If I fail here, Rome will remember my name for the wrong reason. A veteran beside him feels something darker. I can do everything right and still not go home. Behind them, a clerk holds reserve standards and casualty tablets, thinking with cold discipline. Keep track, keep structure, don't let the unit dissolve. If the line holds, the machine pushes. If it wavers, centurions stabilize it, sometimes with orders, sometimes with the vine staff. Reserves are fed into weak points. The general doesn't need to micromanage every sword swing. He maneuvers blocks, not individuals. That's the Roman advantage. Decisions scale. When the enemy breaks, pursuit is controlled, because uncontrolled pursuit turns victory into ambush. Romans learn to stop when stopping is smartest. And when Romans lose, they often retreat in order, preserving the core and living to rebuild. As the dust settles and the last shouts fade into groans, the real work begins. Counting, reorganizing, treating wounds, repairing kit. Tonight the camp will rise again. And tomorrow, Rome must decide whether to chase the enemy into the woods, where the machine's strengths become a question mark. The forest changes everything. Light becomes patchy, green, deceptive. The ground is soft with needles and hidden roots. Helmets scrape branches. The air smells of damp bark and smoke from somewhere you can't see. Scouts return with half sentences and tense eyes. Rome's system adapts by adding parts. Auxilia, non-citizen troops, fight alongside legions. Cavalry that moves faster than heavy infantry. Archers who can reach into trees. Local guides who know the streams and gullies. This isn't generosity, it's efficiency. A Roman legate wants predictable combat, but the frontier offers irregular war. A scout leader, lean and tired, feels the conflict of caution versus duty. If I warn too often, they'll stop trusting me. If I miss one sign, we die? An auxiliary rider, paid by Rome but treated as second class, thinks bitterly, I bleed for their eagle. Will they ever call me equal? Meanwhile, a centurion hates the woods for a simple reason. Formations deform. A crooked line invites panic, he tells himself. The legion responds with procedure, tighter marching order, stronger flank guards, more frequent halts to build smaller fortified positions, and relentless reconnaissance. Watchtowers and cleared paths appear. Roads are hacked through underguard. When threatened, Rome turns terrain into a project. But the enemy learns too. They watch Rome's habits, the camp shape, the march rhythm, the reliance on supply lines. They aim not for glorious battle, but for disruption. Cut a convoy, poison a well, kill a sentry. One missing mule becomes 3 missing days of food. At night, rain drums on tent leather. A sentry stands shivering at the palisade, eyes straining into blackness. His private fear is not death, it's surprise. If I blink wrong, he thinks, I'll be the reason the camp screams. In the distance, an owl calls once, then stops. The forest goes quiet in a way that feels intentional. And somewhere out there, a plan is forming that doesn't try to beat Rome head-on. It tries to starve the machine. At a river port, where looks like commerce, you hear gulls and creaking rope, smell wet timber, and sour wine leaking from barrels. Sacks of grain thump onto planks. A clerk counts aloud while soldiers check for rot and insects. Mules stamp, irritated, already burdened. This is logistics, the Roman superpower that rarely makes statues. The legion needs grain, fodder, tools, spare sandals, nails, leather, oil, salt, and medical supplies. It needs them regularly, in measurable amounts, and close enough to the front to matter. Rome moves supply by road and river, using wagons, barges, depots, contracts, taxes, and requisitions. The system is boring until it fails, then it is fatal. A quartermaster watches the sky and feels a familiar dread. Rain turns roads into glue. If the wagons sink, men will fight hungry. A merchant forced to sell at fixed prices wrestles with survival. If I resist, Rome punishes me. If I comply, my family starves slowly. A legionary waiting in line for rations feels 2 thoughts collide. I want glory, but I also want my bread today. Romans protect supply lines like they protect standards. Convoys are escorted. Bridges are maintained. Roads are repaired by soldiers who resent the shovel but fear the empty pot. Camps are placed near water sources, but not too near, because disease lives in convenience. Latrines are regulated. Waste is controlled. These details look small, but small failures create large disasters. Information is part of logistics too. Reports move up the chain. A general needs to know how many days of grain remain, how many horses are lame, how many pila can be replaced. Bureaucracy becomes a weapon because it turns uncertainty into numbers. At dusk, barges push off upriver under guard. Lanterns bob on the water like slow fireflies. And somewhere ahead, in a narrow bend where trees lean close, someone is waiting with hooks, axes, and a simple idea. You don't have to defeat a legion if you can cut its food. In a dim tent near headquarters, the lamp burns low and steady. Wax tablets lie open. The smell is oil smoke and damp wool. Outside, the camp murmurs, dice clacking, a cough, a distant shout from the perimeter. Inside, Rome's chain of command turns chaos into actionable orders. The legion works because authority is layered. Centurions control the day-to-day. Tribunes handle broader administration. The legate commands the legion as a whole, issuing plans and receiving reports. Under them, specialists, engineers, medics, armorers, clerks, keep the machine functional. This division matters. When casualties hit, the structure absorbs them. When a unit breaks, it can be rebuilt using the same template. A centurion reads a duty roster and feels the tension of responsibility. If one watchpost fails, it's my men who die first, and my name that carries it. A tribune, ambitious and anxious, thinks, if I don't look decisive, I'll be irrelevant. A standard-bearer polishing the eagle feels private terror. If I lose it, I don't just lose metal, I lose the unit's heart. Rome also uses discipline to keep the parts aligned. Fines, extra duties, demotion, sometimes execution for desertion. The purpose isn't cruelty for its own sake, it's predictability. A soldier must believe that disobedience has a cost and order has a reward. That belief is maintained publicly, so the lesson spreads faster than rumor. But the chain of command has a weakness. It relies on trust. If men stop believing the system protects them, discipline becomes resentment. And resentment inside an armed, trained body is explosive. Leaders know this. That's why pay matters. That's why booty distribution is regulated. That's why retirement promises exist. A legate in the lamplight thinks, feed them, reward them, punish fairly, keep loyalty pointed outward. Tonight, reports arrive, supply delays, enemy raids, restless auxiliaries. The legate's pen pauses. He senses the campaign shifting from marching and fighting to something more dangerous, managing pressure. And that pressure is about to peak when Rome decides to take the enemy's strongest place by siege. A siege begins as a sound you can't escape, digging. Beyond the city walls, Roman spades scrape day and night. The air smells of clay and pine, and smoke from cooking fires hangs low over trenches. Lanterns mark lines of earthworks like stitched scars across the landscape. Rome treats a city like an engineering problem. First, isolate it. Build circumvallation, walls and trenches facing inward, to keep defenders from escaping. Build contravallation, facing outward, to block relief forces. Then, build platforms for artillery. Ballista bolts thud into stone with a sickening crack. Towers rise. Ramps inch forward. Sappers tunnel. Every hour is labor turned into pressure. A city magistrate stands on the wall with ash in his hair and fights pride against fear. If I surrender, my people live, but my name dies. A Roman engineer, listening to the hollow sound of his tunnel, thinks, if the roof collapses, skill dies with it. The legate has his own conflict. If I rush, I waste men. If I wait, Rome calls me weak. Inside the city, food becomes politics. Markets shrink. Bread thins. Water is guarded. Rumors multiply. Outside, Rome's own supply lines stretch, and raiders strike for wagons. The machine can grind, but only if it's fed. That's why siege camps are heavily fortified and obsessively organized. Rome builds a city outside your city, and then uses it to strangle you slowly. Then comes the moment every siege moves toward a breach. Stone cracks. Dust clouds. The gap opens like a mouth. Roman soldiers tighten straps and check blades. They know street fighting is different, narrow, chaotic, deadly. A veteran at the front feels an ugly honesty. I want this over, but I'm afraid of what we become once we're inside. The horn sounds. The cohort steps forward, and as the first shields disappear into the breach, the siege shifts from engineering to human panic, where the machine is strongest and also most terrifying. Inside a captured city, the air is thick with smoke and fear. Streets are narrow, stones slick with spilled water, and worse. You hear doors slammed, crying behind shutters, the hard drum of sandals as cohorts push through intersections. Torches flicker against painted walls. The smell is burning oil, damp plaster, and sweat trapped under helmets. Rome's system tries to control even this chaos. Units move by block, clearing routes, securing key buildings, protecting standards, establishing temporary command points. Orders come through runners and horn signals, short and sharp. The goal is to prevent a victorious army from becoming a stampede. Loot is regulated, at least in theory, because uncontrolled looting breaks discipline and invites ambush in alleys. A centurion at a crossroads feels the conflict between instinct and order. My men want to scatter for treasure. If they do, we die in pieces. A soldier, eyes wide, fights his own battle. I came for pay and land, so why do I feel sick watching civilians run? A local priest clutching a small statue thinks, if I speak, I'm killed. If I stay silent, my gods become ornaments. After the violence, the machine turns again into administration. Survivors are counted. Prisoners are sorted. Taxes and tribute are assessed. A garrison is assigned. Engineers repair walls. Clerks record what's taken. Rome prefers control to annihilation because control pays. This is also where propaganda starts working. Rome presents itself as bringer of order, roads, law, stability, while making examples of resistance. Local elites are offered deals. Citizenship is dangled. The system spreads not only by force, but by incentives. Yet every conquest plants a seed, resentment. A region can be pacified and still boil underneath. A governor knows it and fears embarrassment more than danger. If a revolt starts on my watch, Rome will blame me. A veteran settling nearby thinks, I earned this land, but will it ever feel like home? The city quiets. Smoke thins. A new garrison takes post. And in the countryside, beyond the repaired gates, messengers are already running, carrying the news that Rome can be resisted and that the machine has to be tested again somewhere else. Now the machine turns inward. In northern Italy, Winter air bites like metal. A small river cuts through reeds, dark, unimpressive, but legally powerful. Torches sputter in wind. Boots sink into cold mud. An army waits on the bank, quiet in a way that feels unnatural for thousands of men. The Republic had rules. Generals with armies stayed outside Italy's sacred boundary. But by the late Republic, the legion system has created a new reality. Professional soldiers who serve for years depend on pay and expect retirement rewards. Loyalty starts to attach to commanders who deliver land and protection. The machine that conquers abroad becomes a lever in politics at home. A commander, Caesar as our flashlight, not our hero, stares at the water and feels his conflict sharpen. If I step back, my enemies will destroy me in court. If I step forward, I break the law and gamble everything. A senator in Rome, hearing the rumor, thinks with cold panic. We built the army to protect the state, and now it may choose a man over us. A legionary shivering in the dark feels his own pull. I follow the eagle because it fed me. Is that loyalty or dependency? When the crossing happens, it's fast. The line moves. The river splashes. The sound is almost ordinary, until you remember what it means. This isn't just one general rebelling. It's a system proving it can move against its own government with the same efficiency it uses against foreign enemies. Rome's opponents respond with their own armies, their own promises, their own propaganda. Civil war becomes a competition of machines who can recruit, train, supply, and keep men loyal longer. As the column marches south, the roads feel suddenly narrower. Towns close their gates and wait. And the next stage isn't a battlefield yet. It's a political scramble, where every day of marching creates more momentum than any speech in the Senate. After civil war, the smell of Rome changes. Less incense, more bureaucracy. In a stone office near the Forum, wax seals snap. Coins clink into neat stacks. Clerks scratch names and numbers into ledgers that decide whether veterans get land, whether legions get paid, whether the next revolt is prevented or invited. Augustus steps in as a mechanic of stability. He doesn't invent the legion system, but he locks it into a more permanent shape. Service terms are standardized. Pay becomes regular. Veterans are promised pensions and settlements. A dedicated military treasury helps fund retirement obligations. Legions are stationed mostly on frontiers rather than roaming Italy at the whims of politicians. Permanent forts grow into semi-permanent towns. Bathhouses steam beside barracks. Merchants cluster outside gates. Families form in the shadow of walls. Augustus carries an internal conflict that never leaves him. If I loosen control, Rome falls back into chaos. If I tighten it, they call me king. A senator watching reforms swallows pride and thinks, we're saving the Republic by surrendering parts of it. A veteran polishing his helmet in a frontier fort feels a different fear. I want retirement. But after years of orders, who am I without the system? The machine now has schedules for everything. Paydays, supply contracts, recruitment standards, promotion ladders. Auxiliaries are integrated more formally, with paths to citizenship after service. Engineers and logisticians become permanent necessities, not campaign improvisations. The army becomes an institution that can outlast any single commander by design. But permanence creates dependence. A standing army requires constant funding. Funding requires taxation. Taxation requires administration. The system becomes heavy, and heavy systems hate sudden shocks. In the quiet of the office, a clerk pauses over a number and feels a private dread. If the money runs short, the army shrinks. If the army shrinks, the borders bleed. Outside, the city moves as if stable. Yet on distant frontiers, storms are gathering. And in the next chapter, we follow the machine to the edge, where winter, distance, and stubborn enemies test whether permanent is actually possible. On the frontier, the wind never stops negotiating. In a fort along a cold river, smoke curls from chimneys, and the smell of wet wool fills barracks. Men scrape ice off shields. Horses stamp in frozen mud. Beyond the palisade, the landscape looks empty, but emptiness out here can hide an army. Permanent forts change life. A market grows outside the gates. Bread ovens, potters, taverns, small shrines. Latin mixes with local languages. Children play with sticks like swords because soldiers are the most visible job in town. The legion becomes an economy, demanding grain, paying wages, buying leather, hiring labor. Roads bring merchants. Law follows the standards. A local elder watches Roman patrols and feels two impulses collide. If I resist, my village burns. If I cooperate, we vanish slowly. A fort commander reading reports at night feels a different conflict. If I push patrols too hard, morale breaks. If I relax, raiders grow bold. A legionary near the gate thinks, I guard the empire. But does the empire remember me when my knees fail? Rome manages frontiers with layers. Watchtowers, patrol routes, forts, roads, allied client leaders, intelligence networks, and swift punishment for raids. Engineers maintain bridges. Logisticians keep depots stocked. Discipline keeps routines intact. But pressure builds. Barbarian confederations shifting, local politics changing, occasional plague and famine, sudden snow that stalls wagons. The machine can handle problems until several arrive at once. And when the system strains, the usual Roman fix is more structure, more paperwork, more taxes, more troops. That can work, right up to the moment it causes the next weakness, resentment, corruption, desertion, and a frontier that starts to feel too expensive to hold. Tonight, in the fort, a horn call signals the watch. Torches flare along the wall. Across the river, faint movement stirs in the trees. The machine is still running, but something is testing its endurance, one cold night at a time. Let's end where the Legion always began, with gear on the ground and work in the hands. In a quiet museum today, a single iron sandal nail sits behind glass, small, blunt, unimpressive. In a sense, that nail is Rome. Because the Legion's power lived in ordinary things done consistently. Marching schedules, camp templates, standardized kit, disciplined formations, engineered roads, guarded supply lines. The system's components fit together. Training produced predictable performance under fear. Camps produced nightly security and rapid readiness. Engineering produced mobility, bridges, roads, fortifications, so distance became manageable. Discipline produced cohesion and obedience. Logistics produced endurance, turning campaigns into sustained operations instead of desperate raids. When one part failed, grain spoiled, roads washed out, discipline cracked, the machine stumbled. When parts worked together, Rome could recover from setbacks and keep pressing. A quartermaster in the late empire, hunched over a ledger by lamplight, feels the hard truth. If I can't feed them, no amount of courage matters. A frontier commander watches fog swallow the river and thinks, if reinforcements don't come, my fort becomes a tomb. A veteran in a colony, hearing distant drums in the night, feels a final conflict. I built this peace, but I missed the certainty of orders. And that's the real legacy for our story tonight. Not a single hero, not a single battle, but an organization that treated war like a repeatable process. Others copied pieces of it for centuries: standardization, training, logistics, field engineering, layered command. Few matched Rome's ability to make those pieces work together for so long. The last sensory image to keep: a camp at dusk, ditch half dug, torches rising, the smell of fresh earth. The men are tired, not triumphant. They're building protection with their hands because that's what the system demands. And somewhere beyond the torchlight, someone is still watching. Because every machine, no matter how perfect, eventually meets the moment that asks whether it can keep running tomorrow.